Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the core insights and surprising nuggets from the sources you share with us.
Today, we are undertaking a necessary but very difficult deep dive into the case of Banaz Mahmod.
It is a difficult one. This is the story of a 20-year-old Iraqi Kurdish woman who was murdered in South London back in 2006. But it's so much more than that. It's really a story of a catastrophic failure by the very institutions that were meant to protect her.
Exactly. And our mission today is, I think, really crucial. We're going to be examining the specific organized nature of what's called honor-based abuse. We'll look at the institutional failures that just ignored Banaz's repeated pleas for help, and then the extraordinary police investigation that eventually led to justice.
And crucially, we have to look at the ongoing campaign, the two-decade fight for legal reform that's now known as Banaz's Law. The whole point is to stop this from ever happening again. Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. Let's unpack Banaz's life and the decisions she made that led to this awful situation. She was 20. She was living in South London. Her family had come to the UK in 1995. And the sources are very clear. This entire conflict revolved around a patriarchal concept of honor.
Precisely. And to really get the severity of the threat she was under, you have to look at the context. When she was just, 16 or 17 years old, she was forced into an arranged marriage.
To a man 10 years older than her.
10 years older. And she reported rape, severe violence against him. I mean, this was not a happy, mutually agreed upon relationship by any stretch.
And the sources say her family knew. They knew about the abuse, but they upheld the marriage. Why?
Well, it's because the marriage was about maintaining the family's public image, their honor, and that concept is completely separate from Banaz's own safety or, her dignity.
So for her to leave that marriage?
It was seen as a huge act of defiance. It brought shame, as they saw it, on the family name. But the real perceived betrayal, the thing that tipped it over the edge, came after she finally left. And, critically, she chose her own new boyfriend, Rahmat Suleimani.
And Rahmat was from a different tribe, right? Which, in that specific community context, that just made the perceived offense so much worse.
Exponentially worse. So that choice, her choosing her own partner, choosing her own freedom, that was the final act that, in her family's eyes, it sealed her fate.
And the sources point out this wasn't a crime of passion?
Not at all. It was a premeditated conspiracy, a plot to restore what they saw as social order. By December 2005, her father, Mahmoud Babakir Mahmood, and her uncle, Ari Aga Mahmood, and he was a powerful leader in their community, they held what the sources literally call a council of war.
Council of war. And the goal?
The goal was clear: to kill both Banaz and her boyfriend.
What's so staggering and frankly infuriating when you read this is that Banaz was doing everything right. She was trying to save herself.
She really was. This wasn't a silent crime.
She went to the police 5 times before her death. 5. Reporting the rape, the violence, the explicit threats to kill her.
The sheer number of warnings is just heartbreaking. And let's zoom in on one detail the sources really highlight. On December 12, 2005, she literally handed a handwritten letter to officers at Wimbledon Police Station.
A handwritten letter. What was in it?
I mean, it was essentially her final will and testament, but disguised as a police report. In that letter, she explicitly named the suspects, her father, her uncle, others, who would later go on to murder her. She detailed the threats, the fear. She gave them the whole roadmap.
And yet, nothing. The system just failed. And this is where the institutional dismissal becomes, truly shocking. New Year's Eve, 2005, Banaz shows up at a cafe. She's completely distraught. She's saying her father just tried to kill her. Witnesses said she was terrified.
Right. And the officer who responded, a PC Angela Corns, she assessed the situation not as a vulnerable woman fleeing for her life, but as an inconvenience. Witnesses all said Banaz was incredibly distressed, but the officer's own report, it characterized Banaz as manipulative and melodramatic.
Manipulative.
And she wanted to charge Banaz with criminal damage for smashing a window while she was trying to escape.
Wait, hold on. They were thinking of charging the victim, who had just escaped an attempted murder, for breaking a window.
That is what the source material shows. It's just a profound failure of training, of perception, a complete lack of understanding of the dynamics of so-called honor-based abuse, or HBA. Victims are often forced to these extremes just to get away.
And the aftermath of that failure, it just adds insult to injury. The Independent Police Complaints Commission, the IPCC, they later looked at the case, and they found serious failings. They concluded Banaz had been, quote, let down.
Let down. But the disciplinary action was just minimal. To the absolute outrage of campaigners and her family, the officer and her superior only got words of advice.
Which, for anyone listening who doesn't know UK police sanctions, that's the lowest possible measure. It's basically a verbal warning.
It is. And then that officer was later promoted.
It just sends a devastating message, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That a complete failure to act, which results in a death, carries no real professional consequence.
Absolutely. Banaz's sister, Bekhal, she rightly condemned it. She said it proved the system just didn't care about their lives. And tragically, just a few weeks after those final ignored warnings, the worst came true.
Banaz was murdered on January 24th, 2006. The sources confirmed the brutality was just immense. She was subjected to 2 hours of rape and torture and then strangled with a ligature.
Her body was then stuffed into a suitcase.
And driven over 100 miles away.
Yeah, and buried in a garden in Handsworth, Birmingham. The plan was to make her disappear completely.
But the sources, they point to this one moment of immense courage that completely changed the investigation. And that's the role of her boyfriend, Rahmat Suleimani.
Yes. When Banaz went missing, her parents immediately started what the sources call a web of lies. They told police she often stayed out, that they were worried but tolerant. Rahmat knew better. He knew the danger. The sources describe him as harassing the police to take her disappearance seriously. He kept insisting she hadn't just run away. His persistence is what forced them to act.
And once the Metropolitan Police Homicide Command took over, led by DCI Caroline Goode, they quickly realized this wasn't a simple missing person case.
No, they were facing an organized cover-up.
A conspiracy of silence.
Exactly. The family, community members, they all shared this callous code of honor, and they were actively obstructing the investigation, lying, protecting the killers. It's why HPA sometimes described as being like organized crime. It's a collective effort.
So how did they break that wall of silence? Was there one piece of evidence that just cracked the whole thing open?
There was. It was a game changer. One of the murderers, a man named Mohammed Marid Hama, was arrested and put on remand. And crucially, he was covertly recorded while he was in detention.
And what did that recording reveal?
Hama was bragging about the killing, describing the violence, and clearly implicating Banaz's father, her uncle, and the 2 cousins involved.
He called the murder justice.
Yeah, he did. Those tapes, along with phone data, they didn't just prove the conspiracy, they were also instrumental in eventually finding Banaz's body 3 months later.
And that evidence led to the first convictions. Her father, her uncle, and Mohammed Hama were convicted or pleaded guilty in 2007. All got life sentences.
But the deep dive materials really emphasize that the fight for justice didn't end there.
That's right, because 2 of the cousins, Mohammed Salar Ali and Omar Hussein, they had fled almost immediately to Iraqi Kurdistan.
And DCI Goode was determined that fleeing the country shouldn't be an escape from justice. This decision launched this extraordinary, really pioneering effort.
What made it so historic?
Well, this was a legal and diplomatic first. After these really complex negotiations and incredible detective work, Ali and Hussein became the first ever suspects successfully extradited from Iraq to the UK to face murder charges.
The first ever.
The first ever. They were convicted in 2010, and that moment, it sent a powerful signal around the world that honor killers can't just run home and expect to get away with it.
When you look at the immense effort it took, you realize how much personal courage was needed from the witnesses.
We have to pause and recognize these heroes. Their actions were revolutionary, and they came at a massive personal cost. Banaz's sister, Bekhal Mahmod, who had already fled abuse herself, she made history. She was the only family member to give evidence for the prosecution.
That had never happened before in a UK honor-killing trial. A woman testifying against her own family.
Never. And the consequence for her courage was immediate and severe.
She had to disappear.
Completely. Because of the ongoing threat from her family and community, Bekhal Mahmod has been forced to live under a new identity, in witness protection, ever since. Her choice cost her her entire previous life.
And we also have to talk about the tragic story of her boyfriend, Rahmat Suleimani. He testified twice, despite threats being made against his own family back in Iraq.
He put his life on the line. He did. But the sources indicate that the trauma, the isolation, the weight of it all, it never left him. Tragically, he died by suicide in 2016. It just shows the immense multi-generational cost of this abuse. It goes far beyond the initial victim.
The fight for justice claimed Banaz's life, and then years later it claimed Rahmat's. So this moves us into the legacy, the fight for systemic reform through Banaz's law. And this campaign is being so powerfully led by Banaz's surviving sisters, Payzee and Bekhal, working with amazing organizations like Southall Black Sisters and IKWRRO.
And the core demand is actually quite simple, but it's profound. They want to explicitly recognize honor-based abuse HBA as a statutory aggravating factor in sentencing.
Okay, so let's break that down for the listener. What does a statutory aggravating factor actually mean in a courtroom?
It's about changing the legal starting point for the crime. Right now, a judge might consider honor as a motive, but a statutory factor legally compels the judge to increase the starting sentence. It ensures that honor can never be brought up as some kind of cultural mitigation or an excuse to release the sentence. It structurally hardwires the seriousness of the crime into the law itself.
That makes a lot of sense. So it stops HBA being dismissed as a cultural sensitivity issue.
Exactly. It forces the system to treat it as a crime rooted in a desire to control. And the campaign groups argue HBA needs this special focus because it functions like a form of serious organized crime.
Which domestic violence laws don't always cover.
Right. Domestic violence law often focuses on a single perpetrator. HBA can involve multi-person conspiracies, collective secrecy, even cross-border planning.
This campaign also really shines a light on another huge structural barrier for migrant women victims. Southall Black Sisters highlights this massive problem for victims who have no recourse to public funds, or NRPF.
This is a critical point. It's a form of structural entrapment. NRPF is an immigration condition that denies people access to almost all public welfare benefits, housing assistance, crisis funds. Over 60% of the women using Southall Black Sisters services have NRPF status, and most of them are experiencing HBA.
So if they try to leave their abusive family, what happens to them?
They face an impossible choice. They can either stay and endure life-threatening abuse, or they can leave and face immediate destitution, homelessness, deportation because there's no safety net. That NRPF status actually reinforces the control of the abusive family. It keeps the victim trapped and silent.
So the state's own policy is, in a way, enabling the abuse by taking away the victim's only exit ramp.
Precisely, which is why the campaign calls for abolishing NRPF for victims of violence and extending protection to all migrant women, regardless of their immigration status, to see them as victim survivors first.
And beyond the legal changes, they're demanding broader systemic change, too. They want sustainable ring-fenced funding for specialist by and for services.
Meaning services run by and for Black, minoritized, and migrant women.
Right.
And they point out this huge funding disparity. Millions are spent on perpetrator programs, which is important, but that has to be matched by sustainable funding for the victim support sector, which is currently so precarious. They just need the resources to keep the doors open.
So ultimately, this whole deep dive just shows us the immense personal cost of institutional failure. Banaz's life was taken. Her sister Bekhal had to go into lifelong witness protection.
And Ramat Suleimani suffered a fatal trauma just trying to get justice for the woman he loved.
The sources conclude that Banaz's case was this dramatic, painful demonstration of how utterly unprepared the police and the public sector were to deal with HBA.
And a shared belief among all the campaigners is that this tragedy should have had the same galvanizing effect on our police forces as the Victoria Clem-B case had on social services years earlier.
Meaning that every single public sector, worker police, healthcare staff, teachers, social workers, they all must be informed. They have to be ready to spot the signs of HBA.
And most importantly, be ready to provide immediate, decisive help when someone reaches out. Because as the sources emphasize, that moment might be the only chance they ever get.
And this is the final connection we really want to leave you with today. Banaz Mahmod handed a letter to the police naming her future killers and was dismissed as melodramatic.
Despite the incredible convictions that were eventually secured, the fight for Banaz's law continues right now, today, to try and structurally guarantee the protection of victims. So the question is, nearly 2 decades later, how much has truly changed in the UK system? And what is our societal responsibility right now to ensure that institutional cultural sensitivity never again outweighs the legal and moral duty to protect a life?
That is the essential question at the heart of this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.